July 27th, 1981. For millions of American families, it was just another Monday in the middle of summer. Children were enjoying their school vacation. Shopping centers were busy. Parents ran errands while their kids wandered excitedly through toy aisles, dreaming about the next game or action figure they hoped to take home. No one inside the Hollywood Mall in Hollywood, Florida, could have imagined that before the afternoon was over, one little boy would vanish without a trace, and his disappearance would forever change the way America protects its children. That morning began like countless others for the Walsh family. 6-year-old Adam Walsh was an energetic, cheerful little boy who loved adventure, television, and toys. He had accompanied his mother, Reve Walsh, on what was supposed to be an ordinary shopping trip. There was nothing unusual about the day, nothing to suggest that it would become one of the most heartbreaking child abduction cases in American history. While shopping inside Sears, Reve noticed a display of video game consoles where several boys had gathered, watching older children play. Adam was fascinated. Like many 6-year-olds, he begged to stay and watch for a few minutes. Believing she would only be gone briefly, Reve agreed. She told Adam to remain there while she looked at household items just a short distance away. It seemed like a harmless decision, one that thousands of parents made every day. Just a few minutes, nothing more. When Reve finished browsing and returned to the game display, Adam wasn't there. At first, she wasn't alarmed. Perhaps he had wandered to another nearby aisle. Maybe he was looking at toys. Maybe he had simply become distracted. She called his name. No answer. She searched the surrounding departments. Still nothing. With every passing minute, a mother's concern began turning into fear. She checked nearby aisles again. She asked store employees if they had seen a little boy wearing a red and white striped shirt. No one had. Within moments, Sears employees began searching the store. Managers instructed staff members to look through every department. Restrooms were checked. Storage areas were inspected. Employees walked the sales floor calling Adam's name. Customers joined the search. What had started as a routine shopping trip was quickly becoming something far more serious. As the minutes passed, panic spread through the building. Reve Walsh desperately searched every corner of the store, hoping Adam would suddenly appear with an innocent explanation. But he never did. Someone contacted the Hollywood Police Department. Officers arrived and immediately began gathering information. When had Adam last been seen? What was he wearing? Had anyone noticed someone leaving with a child? Witnesses were interviewed. Store employees described what they remembered. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline minute by minute. Every second suddenly mattered. Outside the mall, officers searched parking lots and surrounding streets. Inside, investigators worked to determine whether Adam had simply wandered away, or whether something far more sinister had happened. As word spread, the atmosphere changed completely. Customers who had been shopping only minutes earlier now watched police move through the mall. Parents instinctively pulled their own children closer. Store employees realized they might be witnessing the beginning of a major criminal investigation. For Reve Walsh, however, none of that mattered. There was only one question. Where was Adam? As daylight slowly faded, hope became harder to hold on to. The little boy who had been watching video games just moments earlier had seemingly disappeared into thin air. No witnesses could explain exactly where he had gone. No immediate answers emerged. Only uncertainty. What no one inside a Hollywood mall realized that afternoon was that Adam's disappearance would soon capture the attention of the entire United States. Television stations would interrupt regular programming. Newspapers across the country would publish his photograph. Millions of parents would follow the case with growing fear. And one family's unimaginable tragedy would ultimately change American law, child protection policies, and missing person investigations forever. But on that first day, none of those changes existed. There was only a frightened mother, an empty toy department, and a 6-year-old boy who had vanished without a trace. The question haunting every investigator was painfully simple. Had Adam Walsh wandered away on his own, or had someone been watching him all along? Before Adam Walsh became the face of one of America's most heartbreaking missing child cases, before his photograph appeared on television screens across the country, before his name inspired laws that would protect generations of children, He was simply a little boy who was deeply loved by his family. To the world, Adam would eventually become a symbol of loss, justice, and child safety. But to his parents, he was their son, their greatest joy, their biggest dream for the future. Adam Walsh was born on November 14th, 1974, to John Walsh and Reve Walsh. The young couple had built a happy life together in South Florida, where they were excited to begin raising a family. Friends remembered them as hardworking and optimistic. They were planning for the future, building careers, and looking forward to watching their son grow. Like any young parents, John and Reve imagined birthdays, school graduations, family vacations, and all the milestones that make childhood so special. They had no reason to believe those dreams would one day be replaced by unimaginable heartbreak. John Walsh worked in the hospitality industry and often traveled for business. His schedule could be demanding, but those who knew the family said he treasured every opportunity to spend time with Adam. Reve Walsh devoted herself to creating a warm and loving home. She was a caring mother who enjoyed taking Adam on everyday outings, whether it was a trip to park, a visit to beach, or simply running errands together. The Walsh family lived what many would describe as an ordinary American life. There were no extraordinary circumstances, no public attention, no reason to think they would one day become known around the world. At the center of that ordinary life was 6-year-old Adam. According to family members and those who knew him, Adam was an energetic, curious, and friendly child. He loved cartoons. He enjoyed playing with toys and watching television. Like many boys his age, he was fascinated by video games, which were becoming increasingly popular in the early 1980s. His excitement over simple childhood adventures often made every outing feel like a special occasion. Family photographs show a smiling little boy with bright eyes and infectious energy. His parents later described him as kind-hearted, affectionate, and full of curiosity about the world around him. He asked questions. He laughed easily. He enjoyed meeting people. Most importantly, he trusted the adults around him. That trust is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story. Children naturally believe the world is safe because the people they love work every day to protect them. Adam was no different. He had no way of understanding the dangers that adults worry about. To him, a trip to the shopping mall was simply another exciting day with his mother. Like many families in America during that era, the Walshes never imagined that allowing a child to watch a video game demonstration for a few minutes could end in tragedy. In 1981, public awareness about child abductions was very different from what it is today. Many shopping centers had no comprehensive security camera systems. There were no mobile phones, no instant emergency alerts, no nationwide missing child notification network. Parents certainly care about safety, but the world operated with a level of trust that would later change forever. The Walsh family shared that same trust. John and Reve believed they were raising their son in a community where children could enjoy ordinary moments without constant fear. Their hopes for Adam's future were simple. They wanted to watch him grow, celebrate birthdays, attend school events, see him discover his talents, and build a happy life. Like every loving parent, they imagined decades of memories still waiting to be made. None of those dreams seemed impossible. In fact, they felt inevitable. No parent leaves home expecting an ordinary shopping trip to become the last normal day of their child's life. That is why Adam's story resonated with millions of families across America. His disappearance didn't happen during a dangerous adventure. It didn't occur in an isolated wilderness or during extraordinary circumstances. It happened during one of the most routine activities imaginable, a shopping trip with his mother. Parents across the country saw themselves in John and Reve Walsh. They imagined their own children standing in Adam's place. And suddenly, a case that began inside one Florida department store became every parent's worst nightmare. The world would soon come to know Adam Walsh because of what happened on July 27, 1981. But those who loved him wanted him to be remembered for something much greater, not as a victim, but as a joyful little boy whose short life would ultimately inspire changes that have helped protect countless children for generations. At that moment, however, none of those changes had happened. John and Reve were not national advocates. They were simply two frightened parents whose 6-year-old son had disappeared. And with every passing hour, Their hope of bringing Adam home was beginning to fade. Every missing person investigation has one moment that detectives return to again and again: the last confirmed sighting, the final place where someone knows, without question, that the missing person was safe. For 6-year-old Adam Walsh, that place was the toy department inside the Sears store at the Hollywood Mall in Hollywood, Florida. It was there, on the afternoon of July 27, 1981, that an ordinary shopping trip turned into one of the most devastating child abduction cases in American history. After entering the store with his mother, Reve Walsh, Adam became fascinated by a display of Atari video games. Several older boys had gathered around the demonstration, taking turns playing while curious shoppers stopped to watch. Like many children his age, Adam was captivated. He asked his mother if he could stay and watch the game for a few minutes. Believing she would only be browsing nearby, Reve agreed. She reminded Adam to stay where he was and walked a short distance away to look at lamps and household items. By all accounts, she expected to return within minutes. For a short time, everything appeared normal. Witnesses later confirmed seeing Adam standing near the video game display alongside several other children. No one reported seeing him frightened or upset. There were no immediate signs that anything was wrong. But sometime during those next few minutes, events took a tragic turn. According to later accounts gathered during the investigation, a Sears security guard approached a group of boys after a disagreement reportedly broke out among some of the older children using the game display. The guard instructed the older boys to leave the area. Exactly what happened to Adam during or immediately after that moment has never been established with complete certainty. Some witnesses believed Adam may have followed the older boys as they left the department. Others remembered seeing children moving toward another part of the store. Because different witnesses recalled different details, investigators were never able to reconstruct every second of Adam's movements. That uncertainty became one of the greatest challenges in the entire investigation. When Reve Walsh returned only a few minutes later, Adam was gone. At first, she assumed he had wandered to another nearby aisle. She searched the toy department, then the neighboring departments. She called his name again and again. There was no answer. The search quickly became more urgent. She asked Sears employees whether anyone had seen her son. Most had not. Some employees immediately began helping her search throughout the store. Managers were notified, and staff members checked nearby departments, restrooms, exits, and employee-only areas. Every passing minute increased the urgency. What had begun as a routine search for a child who might have wandered away was rapidly becoming something much more serious. Someone contacted the Hollywood Police Department, and officers arrived to begin what would become one of the largest investigations in the city's history. Detectives immediately started building a timeline. When had Adam last been seen? Who had spoken with him? Which exits were closest to the toy department? Could anyone remember seeing a child leaving with an adult? Investigators interviewed Sears employees, customers, and security personnel. Every witness was asked to recall the smallest details. Where were you standing? What time did you arrive? Did you notice anyone acting strangely? Did you see Adam after the security guard dispersed the children? Unfortunately, many answers conflicted. Some people believed they had seen Adam walking through the store. Others weren't certain. Several witnesses came forward over the following days, but like many major investigations, memories varied, and not every account could be independently confirmed. The lack of a clear timeline made the investigation significantly more difficult. Adding to the challenge was the reality of 1981. The shopping mall had no comprehensive surveillance camera system capable of tracking Adam's movements. There was no cell phone footage, no digital records, no instant alerts to nearby police agencies. Investigators had to rely almost entirely on witness statements and traditional detective work. As officers searched the mall and surrounding parking lots, hope remained that Adam had simply wandered away and would soon be found. But as the afternoon turned into evening, that hope began to fade. The search expanded beyond Sears. Police checked nearby businesses. Officers searched roads surrounding the mall. Volunteers joined the effort, believing every extra pair of eyes might make the difference. Meanwhile, John Walsh rushed home after learning that his son was missing. Within hours, the Walsh family's ordinary life had been transformed into every parent's worst nightmare. No one could explain how a 6-year-old had disappeared from a busy department store in the middle of the day. The unanswered questions multiplied with every passing hour. Had Adam become separated from his mother and walked outside on his own? Had someone convinced him to leave? Or had a predator been watching the toy department, waiting for the perfect opportunity? Investigators had no immediate answers, only a growing realization that time was becoming their greatest enemy. Because in missing child cases, the first few hours are often the most critical, and with each minute that passed, the chances of finding Adam safely were becoming more uncertain. The search was no longer limited to a department store. It was about to spread across South Florida, and soon the entire nation. As daylight faded on July 27, 1981, hope slowly gave way to fear. What had begun as a frantic search inside a department store was rapidly becoming one of the largest missing child investigations Florida had ever seen. 6-year-old Adam Walsh had vanished without a trace. There were no confirmed sightings after he disappeared from the Sears toy department. No clear suspect. No obvious explanation. Only a desperate family waiting for answers that refused to come. Within hours, the Hollywood Police Department expanded its search far beyond the shopping mall. Officers searched nearby streets, neighborhoods, canals, vacant lots, and wooded areas surrounding the mall. Patrol cars cruised through residential communities while investigators knocked on doors, hoping someone had seen a young boy matching Adam's description. Every possible lead had to be checked. Every phone call mattered. Every reported sighting offered a small spark of hope. As the investigation grew, other law enforcement agencies joined the effort. Detectives coordinated with neighboring police departments, sheriff's offices, and state authorities, sharing Adam's description and asking officers across South Florida to remain alert. Road patrols increased. Vehicles matching witness descriptions were checked whenever possible. Investigators worked around the clock, knowing that the first hours of a missing child investigation are often the most critical. But despite the urgency, there were still no answers. The search was no longer limited to law enforcement. Hundreds of volunteers came forward to help. Neighbors, church groups, local businesses, and complete strangers gathered to search parks, empty fields, roadside ditches, and neighborhoods throughout Broward County. Many had never met the Walsh family. They simply couldn't bear the thought of a 6-year-old child being alone somewhere. Some volunteers walked for hours under Florida's summer sun. Others distributed flyers with Adam's photograph at gas stations, restaurants, shopping centers, and schools. Parents brought their own children to help hand out missing person posters, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize the smiling little boy. Inside the Walsh home, however, every passing hour became more painful. The telephone rang constantly. Friends offered support. Neighbors stopped by with food and encouragement. But John and Reve Walsh wanted only one thing: their son. They refused to believe Adam was gone forever. Instead, they held on to the hope that someone had taken him and that he would soon be found alive. Like many parents of missing children, they clung to every reported sighting, every anonymous phone call, every rumor, every possibility. Investigators understood that many tips would ultimately prove inaccurate, but none could be ignored. Each one had to be investigated. As the days passed, the case attracted growing media attention. Local television stations interrupted regular programming with updates on the search. Newspapers printed Adam's photograph across their front pages. Radio stations repeatedly broadcast his description, asking listeners to contact police with any information. The story quickly spread beyond South Florida. Soon, newspapers and television networks across the United States were reporting on Adam's disappearance. Millions of Americans who had never heard of the Walsh family suddenly knew the face of a 6-year-old boy who had vanished during a shopping trip. Parents everywhere imagined the same terrifying question: what if this happened to my child? The case struck a deep emotional chord because there was nothing extraordinary about the circumstances. Adam hadn't disappeared during a dangerous adventure. He hadn't wandered into the wilderness. He vanished from a busy department store in the middle of the day. If it could happen there, people wondered where else it could happen. As national attention intensified, pressure on investigators grew. The public demanded answers. Journalists asked difficult questions. Could the child still be nearby? Had someone seen something important but failed to report it? Was this an abduction? Or had investigators overlooked a critical clue? Detectives continued reconstructing Adam's final known movements inside Sears, interviewing employees and customers again and again. Witness statements were carefully compared. Timelines were revised. Potential suspects were examined. But despite thousands of hours of investigative work, no breakthrough emerged. For John and Reve Walsh, the emotional toll became almost unbearable. Every morning began with hope. Every evening ended with disappointment. They waited by the telephone, praying for the call that would tell them Adam had been found. Instead, the silence continued. The search entered another day, then another, and another. With each passing hour, investigators became increasingly concerned that they were no longer searching for a lost child, but for the person responsible for making him disappear. Then, 16 days after Adam vanished, the investigation took a heartbreaking turn. A discovery made more than 100 miles away would forever change the lives of the Walsh family and transform a missing child case into one of the most tragic murder investigations in American history. For more than 2 weeks, John and Reve Walsh refused to give up hope. Every telephone call made their hearts race. Every reported sighting brought a new wave of optimism. Friends, volunteers, and investigators continued searching, believing that somewhere, somehow, 6-year-old Adam might still be alive. But on August 10th, 1981, exactly 16 days after Adam disappeared, that hope came to a devastating end. More than 100 miles north of Hollywood, near Vero Beach, Florida, a man working in a rural area made a tragic discovery beside a canal. He immediately contacted authorities. Deputies responded and secured the scene, quickly realizing they were dealing with the remains of a young child. Because of the condition of the evidence and the seriousness of the case, investigators worked carefully, documenting every detail before anything was moved. The area was searched for additional evidence. Photographs were taken, and forensic specialists were called to assist. At that moment, no one wanted to make assumptions, but investigators already feared the heartbreaking possibility. Could this be the missing boy the entire country had been searching for? The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for forensic examination. Meanwhile, detectives contacted the Walsh family and informed them that evidence had been found requiring further investigation. For John and Reve, the waiting became almost unbearable. After more than 2 weeks of uncertainty, they desperately hoped police were wrong. They prayed that Adam would still be found alive somewhere else. Sadly, the examination confirmed their worst nightmare. The remains were identified as Adam Walsh. The announcement devastated not only the Walsh family, but millions of Americans who had followed the case through newspapers and television broadcasts. A nationwide search that had begun with hope had ended in unimaginable tragedy. The medical examiner conducted a detailed autopsy to determine what had happened. The examination confirmed that Adam had been the victim of a homicide. Due to the condition of the remains and the evidence available, investigators were able to establish important forensic findings that guided the direction of the investigation. Rather than ending the case, the discovery marked the beginning of an even larger criminal investigation. Detectives now face a new and urgent question. Who had taken Adam Walsh? And where had the crime begun? Because Adam had disappeared from a busy shopping mall, but was found more than 100 miles away, investigators knew the offender had likely transported him after the abduction. That realization dramatically expanded the scope of the investigation. Law enforcement agencies from multiple jurisdictions began working together. Detectives reviewed witness statements once again. Vehicles seen near the Sears store were re-examined. Known offenders were investigated. Individuals with histories of violent crimes against children were questioned. Every lead, no matter how small, was pursued. The discovery also intensified public reaction. Communities across Florida mourned alongside the Walsh family. Churches held prayer services. Schools observed moments of silence. Parents hugged their children a little tighter. Across the United States, Adam's photograph had become a symbol of every family's worst fear. His death forced millions of Americans to confront a painful reality. Child abductions were not distant stories that happened only somewhere else. They could happen in an ordinary shopping mall during an ordinary afternoon. The case dominated national headlines for weeks. Television networks provided continuous updates. Editorials questioned whether enough had been done to protect children. Many parents began changing the way they supervised their sons and daughters in public places. What happened to Adam didn't just affect one family. It changed how an entire nation thought about child safety. For investigators, however, grief quickly gave way to determination. Someone had abducted and murdered a 6-year-old child. That person was still free. The pressure to solve the case became enormous. Detectives formed new investigative teams, expanded interviews, and worked with state and federal agencies to identify possible suspects. Yet despite the growing number of tips and the nationwide attention, one crucial piece of the puzzle remained missing. There was no clear suspect, no arrest, no immediate breakthrough. The case that had united an entire country was becoming increasingly complex. Unknown to investigators, one man with a long history of violent crime would soon emerge as the focus of the investigation. His name had already appeared in law enforcement files. He had confessed to terrible crimes before, and years later, he would become one of the most controversial figures ever connected to the Adam Walsh case. His name was Ottis Toole. Whether he was truly responsible or whether the full truth would remain forever debated, was about to become one of the most discussed chapters in this heartbreaking investigation. For months after Adam Walsh's murder, investigators faced a painful reality. They knew what had happened, but they still didn't know who was responsible. Thousands of tips poured into police departments across Florida. Detectives interviewed witnesses, followed countless leads, and investigated individuals with histories of violent crimes. Every possible suspect had to be examined because the public demanded answers, and the Walsh family deserved justice. Among those names, one would eventually stand above all the others: Ottis Toole. By the time investigators began focusing on Toole, he was already well known to law enforcement. He had an extensive criminal record and was associated with numerous violent offenses across several states. During different investigations, Toole admitted involvement in multiple crimes, although many of his statements later proved unreliable or impossible to verify. That reputation made him an extremely complicated suspect. On one hand, investigators knew he was capable of horrific violence. On the other hand, they also knew he had a history of making contradictory statements. Separating truth from fiction became one of the greatest challenges of the investigation. Detectives discovered that Toole had been in South Florida around the time Adam disappeared. Witness information and investigative leads placed him within the general region, making him someone police could not ignore. As questioning continued, Toole eventually confessed to abducting and murdering Adam Walsh. For investigators, it appeared they might finally have the breakthrough they had been searching for. But almost immediately, problems began to emerge. Toole's statements were inconsistent. During different interviews, he changed important details. Some facts matched evidence already known to investigators. Others conflicted with established timelines or could not be independently confirmed. At times, he admitted responsibility. At other times, he denied any involvement at all. The repeated changes made it extremely difficult for detectives to determine which parts of his story, if any, were accurate. The investigation became even more complicated because significant physical evidence was limited. Unlike many modern investigations, forensic technology in the early 1980s was far less advanced. DNA testing capable of conclusively identifying a suspect was not yet available. Investigators relied heavily on witness testimony, physical evidence, and confessions. In Adam's case, there was no single piece of forensic evidence that conclusively linked Toole to the crime. Another setback involved evidence that could no longer be examined. According to later reports, some physical evidence collected during the original investigation had been lost over the years, limiting opportunities for future forensic testing as technology improved. That loss became one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Many investigators believe the missing evidence might have answered critical questions decades later. Instead, uncertainty remained. Despite these challenges, several detectives continued believing that Ottis Toole was responsible. Over the years, investigators reviewed his statements alongside witness accounts and other available evidence. Some details appeared consistent with known facts. Others remained impossible to verify. The case generated intense debate both inside and outside law enforcement. Could Toole's original confession have been truthful despite later contradictions? Or had investigators focused on a suspect whose own unreliable statements complicated the search for certainty? For the Walsh family, the unanswered questions were deeply painful. John and Reve Walsh wanted more than suspicion. They wanted proof. They wanted accountability that would withstand every legal challenge. Like countless families affected by violent crime, they hoped for answers that were beyond reasonable doubt. Those answers never fully came through the criminal courts. Because of the weaknesses in the available evidence, Ottis Toole was never tried or convicted for Adam Walsh's murder. He died in prison in 1996 while serving sentences for other crimes, taking many unanswered questions with him. Years later, investigators conducted another comprehensive review of the case. After examining decades of evidence, witness statements, and investigative records, the Hollywood Police Department announced in 2008 that they officially considered Ottis Toole responsible for Adam Walsh's abduction and murder. The announcement brought a measure of closure to the Walsh family, although some aspect of the case continue to be discussed by researchers and legal experts because of the limitations of the surviving evidence. Even today, the Adam Walsh investigation remains one of the most closely examined child homicide cases in American history, not because investigators stopped searching, but because it demonstrated how difficult it can be to achieve absolute certainty when critical evidence is limited and key witnesses are no longer alive. For John Walsh, however, one thing became clear. Waiting for perfect answers could not become the rest of his life. If he couldn't change what had happened to Adam, he could fight to prevent other families from experiencing the same nightmare. That decision would transform a grieving father into one of the most influential victims advocates in American history and change the nation's approach to missing children forever. As the years passed, the Adam Walsh case became more than a heartbreaking child abduction. It became one of the most debated criminal investigations in modern American history. Although investigators believed they had identified the man responsible, many questions refused to disappear. The case continued to generate discussion among detectives, legal experts, journalists, and the public, not because people doubted the importance of justice, but because they wanted absolute certainty. For the Walsh family, every unanswered question prolonged an already unimaginable tragedy. For investigators, the case became a reminder that even the largest investigations can face obstacles that no amount of determination can completely overcome. One of the biggest challenges involved physical evidence. When Adam disappeared in 1981, forensic science was far less advanced than it is today. Detectives carefully collected and preserved evidence using the best techniques available at the time. However, as the years passed and technology improved, investigators discovered that some evidence connected to the case had been lost or was no longer available for modern testing. That revelation shocked many people. If the evidence had still existed, newer forensic techniques, including advanced DNA analysis, might have answered questions that investigators had struggled with for decades. Instead, those opportunities were gone forever. The loss of evidence became one of the most criticized aspects of the investigation. It wasn't a result of a lack of effort by every detective involved, but it reflected the evidence handling standards and record-keeping practices of that era, which were very different from today's procedures. As forensic science advanced throughout the 1980s and 1990s, many police departments across the United States introduced stricter evidence preservation policies. Lessons reinforced by difficult cases like Adam Walsh's. The investigation also faced criticism over its early response. Because child abduction cases were handled differently in 1981, there were no nationwide Amber Alerts, no centralized missing children databases, and no standardized protocols requiring immediate coordination between multiple agencies. Investigators worked tirelessly, but they were operating within a system that lacked many of the tools available today. Over the years, experts questioned whether stronger communication, faster information sharing, or broader public alerts might have changed the course of the investigation. Those questions were never easy to answer. Law enforcement officials have consistently emphasized that detectives devoted enormous resources to finding Adam and identifying the offender. Yet the case highlighted how limited investigative systems could be when agencies lacked modern technology and national coordination. Another challenge involved time. As months turned into years, witnesses' memories naturally became less reliable. People who had briefly visited the Sears store struggled to remember exact times or specific faces. Some witnesses recalled details differently during later interviews. Others could no longer be located. Investigators repeatedly reviewed statements, trying to separate confirmed facts from fading memories. The passage of time became an invisible obstacle. Every year made reconstruction more difficult. Every unanswered question became harder to resolve. Meanwhile, public frustration continued to grow. The Adam Walsh case had captured the attention of millions of Americans. People followed every development through newspapers and television. Each reported breakthrough created hope. Each setback brought disappointment. Many believed the case should have been solved quickly. Instead, years passed without the certainty that everyone wanted. For John and Reve Walsh, the emotional burden never eased. They attended meetings with investigators, reviewed updates, answered reporters' questions, and waited, always waited. Every new lead raised hope. Every dead and reopened old wounds. The uncertainty became almost as painful as the loss itself. John Walsh later spoke publicly about the importance of improving missing child investigations, believing that no family should endure years without answers because of gaps in investigative systems. His determination would eventually influence major reforms across the United States. Despite the criticism surrounding certain aspects of the investigation, one fact remained clear. The detectives who worked the case never stopped searching. Over the decades, different generations of investigators reviewed files, re-examined evidence, and followed new leads whenever they emerged. The case remained active because law enforcement refused to let Adam Walsh be forgotten. Finally, in 2008, after another comprehensive review of the evidence, the Hollywood Police Department officially identified Ottis Toole as the person responsible for Adam Walsh's abduction and murder and formally closed the case. For some people, the announcement brought closure. For others, questions remained. But regardless of differing opinions about certain aspects of the investigation, Adam's case had already transformed the nation. It exposed weaknesses in missing child investigations. It inspired improvements in evidence preservation. It encouraged stronger cooperation between law enforcement agencies. And, perhaps most importantly, it gave one grieving father a new purpose. John Walsh realized that while he could never change what happened to Adam, he could dedicate the rest of his life to helping other families avoid the same nightmare. That mission would soon grow far beyond a single investigation. It would become a nationwide movement, one that would forever change the fight against violent crime and missing child cases across America. For many families, the loss of a child is a tragedy from which life never fully recovers. For John Walsh, it became something else. A mission. The investigation into Adam Walsh's disappearance had consumed months, then years. Although law enforcement continued working the case, John and his wife, Reve Walsh, found themselves living with a pain that words could barely describe. Their home was quieter. Birthdays became painful reminders. Every family milestone carried the weight of someone who should have been there. But amid overwhelming grief, John reached a life-changing decision. He refused to allow Adam's name to become just another forgotten case file. Instead of withdrawing from the public, John began speaking openly about what had happened to his family. He described the emotional devastation of losing a child and frustration of navigating a system that, at the time, lacked many of the tools needed to respond quickly to child abductions. His message was simple. No family should ever have to experience what the Walsh family endured. As he met other parents whose children had disappeared or been murdered, John realized his family was not alone. Across the United States, countless families were facing the same nightmare, desperately searching for missing loved ones while struggling to gain public attention and coordinated law enforcement support. Many cases received only local media coverage. Some disappeared from the headlines within days. Others remained unsolved for years. John believed that had to change. Rather than focusing only on Adam's case, he began advocating for all victims and their families. He worked with law enforcement officials, community organizations, and elected leaders to improve the way missing child investigations were handled. He encouraged stronger communication between agencies and emphasized the importance of acting quickly when a child disappeared. His advocacy wasn't driven by anger. It was driven by purpose. John understood that nothing could bring Adam back. But if changes could save another child, then Adam's life would continue to make a difference. As his public profile grew, he became one of the nation's most recognizable voices for victims' rights. Families from across America contacted him, sharing stories of missing children, unsolved murders, and investigations that needed public attention. He listened. He spoke with them. He used every opportunity to remind the public that behind every missing person poster was a family waiting for answers. Gradually, lawmakers also began paying attention. John testified before government officials, participated in public discussions, and supported efforts to strengthen laws protecting children. His experience gave him credibility that statistics alone could never provide. He wasn't speaking as a politician. He wasn't speaking as a lawyer. He was speaking as a father. That made people listen. At the same time, public awareness surrounding child safety began changing. Parents became more cautious in crowded places. Schools increased discussions about personal safety. Communities organized educational programs focused on protecting children. While many organizations contributed to these efforts, John Walsh became one of the most recognizable advocates for keeping missing children in the public eye. His determination eventually led to an idea that many people initially considered impossible. What if television could become a tool for solving crimes? Instead of simply reporting crimes after they happened, what if ordinary citizens could actively help law enforcement identify fugitives and locate missing people? It was an ambitious vision, one that would soon become reality. Working with television producers and law enforcement professionals, John helped create a program unlike anything American audiences had seen before. Rather than treating crime as entertainment, the program would present real cases, feature wanted fugitives, and encourage viewers to contact authorities with information. Its goal was simple: turn millions of viewers into millions of extra eyes. That idea would soon become America's Most Wanted. The program would help law enforcement capture hundreds of fugitives, recover missing children, and bring long-awaited answers to countless families. For John Walsh, however, the show represented something much deeper than television success. It was Adam's legacy. Every fugitive captured, every missing child recovered, every family reunited. Each success honored the little boy whose life had inspired a father to refuse surrender. The Walsh family could never change the past, but they could help shape the future. And in doing so, they transformed personal tragedy into one of the most influential victims' advocacy movements in American history. The next chapter of that journey would extend far beyond one family. It would become a national movement, proving that one father's determination could help bring justice to thousands of victims and forever change the relationship between law enforcement, the media, and the American public. By the mid-1980s, John Walsh had spent years fighting for justice, not only for Adam, but for thousands of other victims whose cases remained unsolved. He had spoken with grieving parents. He had worked alongside investigators. He had pushed for stronger laws and better cooperation between law enforcement agencies. Yet one painful truth remained. Many dangerous fugitives were still escaping capture, simply because the public didn't know who they were. John believed ordinary citizens could become one of law enforcement's greatest resources. If millions of people could recognize a wanted criminal's face, someone, somewhere, would eventually make the call that changed everything. That idea became the foundation of one of the most influential crime programs in television history. On February 7, 1988, America's Most Wanted premiered on the Fox television network. It was unlike anything audiences had seen before. Instead of fictional detectives solving imaginary crimes, the program focused entirely on real investigations. Each episode reconstructed actual cases using interviews, dramatic reenactments, and information provided by law enforcement agencies. At the end of every segment, viewers were encouraged to contact authorities if they recognized a suspect or had information that could help solve a case. The concept was simple: turn television viewers into active participants in the search for justice. At first, no one knew whether the idea would succeed. Some questioned whether people would watch a weekly program devoted to real criminal investigations. Others wondered whether anonymous tips from the public would actually help police. The answer came almost immediately. Within days of the first broadcast, law enforcement agencies began receiving credible information from viewers across the country. People recognized suspects. Neighbors noticed familiar faces. Co-workers identified fugitives they had unknowingly worked beside. The public was proving exactly what John Walsh had believed all along. Someone always knows something. As the program continued, America's Most Wanted became far more than a television show. It became an investigative tool. Police departments from across the United States began working directly with the production team, providing case files, photographs, and investigative details in hopes that national exposure would generate new leads. Many cases that had gone cold for years suddenly received fresh attention. Families who had nearly lost hope saw their loved ones' stories reach millions of homes. The results were extraordinary. Over the years, information generated through the program helped authorities capture hundreds of fugitives in the United States and abroad. It also contributed to locating missing children, solving long unsolved cases, and encouraging witnesses to come forward after recognizing suspects featured on the broadcasts. While every arrest depended on the work of law enforcement, the program demonstrated the remarkable power of public participation. A single phone call could change an investigation. A single viewer could recognize a face. A single piece of information could finally bring justice to a family that had waited years for answers. For John Walsh, every successful capture carried personal meaning. Each arrest reminded him why he had refused to surrender after Adam's murder. Although nothing could erase his family's loss, helping another family find answers became a way of honoring Adam's memory. The impact of America's Most Wanted soon extended beyond television ratings. The program changed the relationship between the media and law enforcement. Rather than simply reporting crimes after they occurred, television became an active partner in criminal investigations. Police agencies increasingly recognized that national publicity could generate valuable leads, especially in cases involving fugitives who had crossed state lines or assumed new identities. The show also changed the way many Americans viewed crime prevention. Viewers learned to pay closer attention. Communities became more aware of missing person cases. Families discussed safety in ways they never had before. Millions of people who had never expected to assist a criminal investigation suddenly realized they could make a difference simply by remaining observant. The program remained on the air for more than 2 decades and earned widespread recognition for its contribution to public safety. Its success inspired similar crime-focused programs around the world, proving that informed citizens could become valuable partners in the pursuit of justice. Yet, despite its remarkable achievements, John Walsh never forgot why the program existed. Every episode, every arrest, every missing child recovered, traced back to one 6-year-old boy who disappeared from a Sears department store in 1981. Adam Walsh's life had already changed America, but an even greater transformation was still coming. The movement that began with one grieving father's determination would soon reshape federal law itself, leading to legislation designed to protect millions of children for generations to come. For 25 years, John and Reve Walsh lived with a painful reality. Their son was gone. Nothing could change that. No law, no investigation, no court decision. But if Adam's story could help protect other children, then his life would continue to make a difference long after his death. That belief became the driving force behind one of the most significant child protection laws in American history. By the early 2000s, the United States had made important progress in responding to crimes against children. State and federal agencies had improved cooperation. Missing child investigations had become more organized, and public awareness had grown dramatically. Yet serious challenges remained. Sex offender registration laws varied from state to state. Some jurisdictions maintained detailed records, while others had different reporting standards. Information was often difficult to share across state lines, making it easier for some offenders to move without authorities immediately recognizing their history. Victims, advocates, law enforcement officials, and lawmakers argued that stronger national standards were needed. John Walsh became one of the most visible voices supporting those reforms. For years, he traveled across the country, speaking with members of Congress, law enforcement agencies, victims' organizations, and families who had experienced tragedies similar to his own. His message never changed. Children deserve better protection. Families deserve faster action. and dangerous offenders should not be able to disappear simply by crossing a state border. After years of discussion and legislative work, Congress passed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006. On July 27, 2006, exactly 25 years after Adam disappeared, President George W. Bush signed the legislation into law. For the Walsh family, the date carried profound emotional significance. What had begun as the worst day of their lives had now become a day dedicated to protecting future generations. The act represented one of the most comprehensive federal child protection laws ever enacted in the United States. One of its central goals was to strengthen and standardize the national sex offender registration system. The law established clearer registration requirements and created more consistent standards for sharing information between states. It also strengthened the ability of law enforcement agencies to monitor compliance with registration requirements and improve access to important public safety information. The legislation also expanded protection for children through improved coordination among federal, state, local, and tribal authorities. By encouraging greater consistency in record-keeping and information sharing, lawmakers hoped to reduce gaps that had previously complicated investigations. For law enforcement, these changes represented a significant step forward. Investigators no longer depended solely on local databases when tracking registered offenders. Information could be shared more efficiently, helping agencies coordinate investigations across jurisdictions. The act also supported broader efforts to improve responses to crimes involving children, including better investigative practices, stronger cooperation between agencies, and continued emphasis on protecting vulnerable victims. Although no law can prevent every crime, many officials viewed the legislation as an important advancement in public safety. Across the country, the law became a symbol of how personal tragedy could inspire meaningful reform. For John Walsh, however, the legislation was never about politics. It was about Adam. Every speech he delivered, every meeting with lawmakers, every interview he gave carried the same message. No parent should lose a child because systems fail to protect them. The passage of the Adam Walsh Act also highlighted something larger than a single criminal case. It demonstrated that victims' families can influence national policy. John and Reve Walsh were not elected officials. They were grieving parents. Yet through persistence, advocacy, and decades of public service, they helped shape legislation that continues to influence child protection efforts across the United States. The law also reinforced an important lesson learned from Adam's case. Protecting children requires cooperation. Parents, communities, schools, law enforcement, government agencies. Every part of society has a role to play. No single law can eliminate every danger, but stronger communication, faster information sharing, and continued public awareness can significantly improve the ability to protect children and investigate crimes. Today, more than 4 decades after Adam Walsh disappeared, his name remains closely associated with child protection and victims' advocacy. Countless families may never realize that improvements in investigative procedures, offender registration systems, and public awareness were influenced by one little boy whose life ended far too soon. For John Walsh, that has always been Adam's greatest legacy. Not the tragedy, but the lives that may be protected because the nation chose to learn from it. Yet one final chapter still remains. It is not about laws. It is not about politics. It is about remembrance. Because before Adam Walsh became the inspiration for federal legislation, he was simply a smiling 6-year-old boy whose family never stopped loving him. And that is how they have always wanted the world to remember him. By the early 2000s, more than a quarter of a century had passed since Adam Walsh disappeared from a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida. Generations of detectives had worked the case. Investigators had followed thousands of leads. Witnesses had been interviewed and re-interviewed. Evidence had been examined using every available forensic advancement. Yet despite decades of work, one painful reality remained. The case had never been fully resolved in the eyes of the public. Many people believed Ottis Toole was responsible. Others questioned whether enough evidence existed to reach that conclusion beyond doubt. The Walsh family had lived with those unanswered questions for nearly 27 years. Recognizing both the importance of the case and advances in investigative techniques, the Hollywood Police Department decided to conduct another comprehensive review. This wasn't a routine file check. Detectives carefully reopened decades of investigative records. Thousands of pages of reports were reviewed once again. Witness statements were compared. Evidence inventories were examined. Investigators revisited interviews conducted throughout the 1980s and 1990s, looking for anything that earlier detectives might have overlooked. Their goal wasn't simply to confirm previous conclusions. It was to determine whether modern investigative methods could provide greater clarity. Experienced homicide investigators worked alongside supervisors familiar with the history of the case. Every significant piece of information was reevaluated. They examined Ottis Toole's various confessions. They compared his statements with verified investigative findings. They reviewed witness accounts, timelines, forensic reports, and the remaining physical evidence. Although some original evidence had been lost over the years, detectives relied on the surviving investigative record to build the most complete picture possible. After months of review, investigators reached the same conclusion that several detectives had believed for years. The evidence supported the finding that Ottis Toole was responsible for Adam Walsh's abduction and murder. On December 16, 2008, the Hollywood Police Department held a widely anticipated press conference. Reporters from across the United States gathered to hear the announcement. Nearly 28 years after Adam disappeared, police officially declared the case closed. Investigators explained that while Toole had died in prison in 1996 and could never stand trial, the evidence available after the final review supported identifying him as the offender. The announcement marked the official end to one of America's longest-running and most emotionally significant child homicide investigations. For law enforcement, it represented the conclusion of decades of investigative work. For many members of the public, it finally answered a question that had remained unresolved since 1981. But perhaps no reaction mattered more than that of John and Reve Walsh. Standing before reporters, John Walsh expressed gratitude to the investigators who had continued pursuing the truth for nearly 3 decades. Although no announcement could erase the pain of losing Adam, he said the decision brought a measure of closure to a family that had spent years searching for answers. It was not a celebration. There was no sense of victory, only the quiet acknowledgement that the search for accountability had finally reached its legal conclusion. Reve Walsh shared similar emotions. For years, she had carried the memories of the last ordinary afternoon she spent with her son. The official announcement could never change that day, but it did bring an end to decades of uncertainty surrounding the investigation. Across the country, reactions were mixed. Many people welcomed the decision, believing the evidence supported investigators' conclusion. Others continued discussing the unanswered questions that naturally remain whenever a suspect dies before facing trial in court. Legal experts, journalists, and researchers continued examining the case, not because they questioned Adam's importance, but because it had become one of the most studied child homicide investigations in American history. Despite those discussions, one fact remained undeniable. Adam Walsh's case had already transformed the nation. It had changed the way missing children were reported. It had influenced child protection legislation. It had inspired millions of parents to think differently about safety. And it had motivated one grieving father to dedicate his life to helping others. For the detectives who worked the investigation, the official closure also carried emotional weight. Some had spent decades on the case. Others inherited it from retired investigators who never had the opportunity to see its conclusion. The announcement honored the persistence of every officer, detective, forensic specialist, and support staff member who refused to let Adam's case disappear into history. Yet even after the investigation officially ended, Adam Walsh's story was never truly about solving crime. It became something much larger. A reminder that behind every missing person case is a family waiting for answers. A reminder that justice sometimes takes years, or even decades. And a reminder that one little boy's life would forever change the way America protects its children. Because although the case was officially closed in 2008, Adam Walsh's legacy was only beginning. When Adam Walsh disappeared on July 27, 1981, the United States viewed missing child cases very differently than it does today. There were no nationwide emergency alert systems. No centralized databases that officers across the country could access within seconds. No standardized national response for a missing child. Most police departments handle these cases according to local procedures, and communication between agencies often depended on telephone calls, paper records, and personal contacts. Adam's case exposed just how vulnerable that system could be. Although detectives and volunteers worked tirelessly to find him, the investigation revealed gaps that extended far beyond a single police department. Those lessons would ultimately reshape the way America responds when a child goes missing. One of the most important changes involved child safety awareness. Before Adam's disappearance, many parents believed shopping malls, department stores, and neighborhood parks were relatively safe places for children. It was common for children to briefly explore nearby toy aisles or remain only a short distance from their parents. After Adam's case received national attention, those everyday habits began to change. Parents became more cautious in crowded public places. Schools introduced stronger child safety education. Communities encouraged families to discuss what children should do if they became separated from a parent or approached by a stranger. These conversations were no longer viewed as unnecessary. They became an essential part of protecting children. The investigation also highlighted the importance of a rapid response. One of the major lessons learned was that the first few hours after a child disappears are often the most critical. Today, law enforcement agencies treat reports involving missing children with far greater urgency than was common decades ago. Investigators quickly gather witness statements, review surveillance footage when available, distribute photographs, and coordinate with neighboring agencies to maximize the chances of locating a child as quickly as possible. Although every case is different, the emphasis on immediate action has become one of the defining principles of modern missing child investigations. Another lasting lesson involved cooperation between law enforcement agencies. Adam's case demonstrated that criminals are not limited by city or county boundaries. An investigation may begin in one jurisdiction and quickly expand into another. Over the years, police departments, sheriff's offices, state investigators, and federal agencies developed stronger systems for sharing information and coordinating investigations. This improved cooperation has become one of the most valuable tools available to modern investigators. Technology has also transformed the way missing child cases are handled. In 1981, detectives relied primarily on witness interviews, printed photographs, and physical evidence. Today, investigators may have access to surveillance cameras, digital records, forensic DNA analysis, electronic communication tools, and nationwide information sharing systems that did not exist when Adam disappeared. These advancements do not guarantee every case will be solved. However, they provide investigators with resources that previous generations could only imagine. Adam Walsh's case also demonstrated the importance of preserving evidence. As forensic science advanced over the decades, investigators increasingly recognize that evidence collected today may become even more valuable tomorrow. Proper documentation, secure storage, and careful handling of physical evidence now play a central role in criminal investigations. This lesson has influenced countless agencies responsible for investigating serious crimes. Beyond policing, the case transformed public awareness. Millions of Americans realize that protecting children is not solely the responsibility of parents or law enforcement. Communities also play a role. Teachers, neighbors, store employees, business owners, ordinary citizens. Everyone has the ability to notice something unusual and report concerns to the proper authorities. Many successful investigations begin with a single witness who decides to make one important phone call. John Walsh spent decades reminding the public of that responsibility. Through his advocacy and public outreach, he encouraged people to remain observant, support victims' families, and never assume someone else will report suspicious behavior. His message helped create a culture in which public participation became an important part of child protection. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Adam's case is that tragedy can inspire meaningful change. No reform can erase what happened in 1981. No investigation can restore the years his family lost. But the lessons learned from Adam's disappearance have influenced legislation, investigative practices, and public education throughout the United States. Today, many parents teach their children safety habits that became widely discussed only after Adam's case. Law enforcement officers received training shaped by lessons learned from investigations like his. Communities respond more quickly when children disappear. Those changes are part of Adam's lasting legacy. His story is remembered not only because of the tragedy itself, but because it encouraged a nation to ask difficult questions, improve its systems, and work harder to protect its youngest citizens. Yet behind every law, every investigative reform, and every safety campaign remains one simple truth. At the heart of this story was a 6-year-old boy who loved video games, smiled easily, and left home expecting an ordinary day with his mother. The laws may have changed. The investigations may have improved. But for the Walsh family, Adam was never just a case. He was, and always will be, their son. When a criminal case finally reaches its conclusion, headlines often focus on arrests, investigations, and courtroom decisions. But for the families left behind, the story doesn't end when the cameras leave. It doesn't end when a case is officially closed. And it doesn't end when justice is finally served. For John and Reve Walsh, life would forever be divided into 2 chapters. Before July 27, 1981, and everything that came after, the disappearance and murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh changed every part of their lives. The family they had dreamed of building was shattered in a single afternoon. The future they had imagined, birthdays, school graduations, family vacations, and watching Adam grow into adulthood, was suddenly replaced by grief that would never completely disappear. Like many parents who lose a child, John and Reve have spoken over the years about how there is no complete recovery from such a loss. You don't simply move on. Instead, you learn how to move forward while carrying the memory of someone you love. Every birthday became a reminder of the years Adam never had. Every holiday carried an empty place at the table. Every family photograph preserved a smile that would never grow older. Grief changed with time, but it never truly ended. In the years following Adam's death, the Walsh family made a remarkable decision. Rather than allowing tragedy to define them, they chose to transform their pain into purpose. John Walsh devoted his life to helping victims and supporting law enforcement, while Reve quietly continued honoring Adam's memory through advocacy and public awareness. Together, they demonstrated that even in unimaginable heartbreak, compassion and determination can create hope for others. The Walsh family also grew in the years that followed. John and Reve welcomed more children into their lives, building a family while never forgetting the son whose memory remained at the center of everything they did. They have often spoken about remembering Adam, not only for the tragedy that changed America, but for the joyful little boy he was before the world knew his name. That distinction mattered deeply to them. Adam was not born to become a symbol. He was a child who loved cartoons, toys, and spending time with his parents. He laughed. He played. He dreamed like every other 6-year-old. Those who loved him wanted the world to remember those moments, not only the terrible event that ended them. The emotional impact extended far beyond the Walsh family. Communities across Florida mourned alongside them. People who had never met Adam attended memorial services, sent letters of support, and contributed to search efforts and child safety initiatives. For many parents, Adam became the child they never knew but could never forget. His photograph remained recognizable for decades because families across America saw their own children reflected in his smile. The case also left a lasting impression on the investigators who worked it. Many detectives later acknowledged that Adam's disappearance stayed with them throughout their careers. Some retired before the case was officially closed. Others inherited the investigation years later. Regardless of when they joined, they shared a common goal: to give one family the answers they had waited so long to receive. Although the official closure in 2008 brought a measure of certainty, it could never erase nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions. For many people involved in the case, closure did not mean forgetting. It meant finally understanding what had happened and ensuring that Adam's story would continue to inspire positive change. Communities also found ways to heal. Schools strengthened child safety education. Neighborhood organizations promoted awareness programs. Law enforcement agencies improved cooperation in missing child investigations. Parents became more engaged in conversations about protecting children in public places. These changes did not happen overnight. They were built gradually, inspired by one family's determination that no other parent should experience the same nightmare. Today, Adam Walsh's name is recognized across the United States, but his greatest legacy is not found in newspaper headlines or legal documents. It lives in the children who returned home safely because someone recognized a suspect. It lives in the families who received help through victims' advocacy organizations. It lives in every law enforcement officer who responds immediately when a child is reported missing. And it lives in every parent who holds a child's hand a little tighter while walking through a crowded place. Perhaps that is the most powerful legacy of all. A little boy whose life lasted only 6 years continues to protect children more than 4 decades later. His story reminds us that behind every investigation is a family whose lives have been forever changed. Behind every missing child poster is a mother refusing to stop searching, a father refusing to stop believing, and a child whose name deserves to be remembered with dignity, compassion, and love. As Adam's story approaches its final chapter, one message rises above every legal victory and every investigative milestone. The greatest tribute to his life is not simply remembering how he died. It is remembering how one little boy inspired millions of people to value every child's right to come home safely. When a criminal case finally reaches its conclusion, headlines often focus on arrests, investigations, and courtroom decisions. But for the families left behind, the story doesn't end when the cameras leave. It doesn't end when a case is officially closed. And it doesn't end when justice is finally served. For John and Reve Walsh, life would forever be divided into 2 chapters. Before July 27, 1981, and everything that came after. The disappearance and murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh changed every part of their lives. The family they had dreamed of building was shattered in a single afternoon. The future they had imagined, birthdays, school graduations, family vacations, and watching Adam grow into adulthood, was suddenly replaced by grief that would never completely disappear. Like many parents who lose a child, John and Reve have spoken over the years about how there is no complete recovery from such a loss. You don't simply move on. Instead, you learn how to move forward while carrying the memory of someone you love. Every birthday became a reminder of the years Adam never had. Every holiday carried an empty place at the table. Every family photograph preserved a smile that would never grow older. Grief changed with time, but it never truly ended. In the years following Adam's death, the Walsh family made a remarkable decision. Rather than allowing tragedy to define them, they chose to transform their pain into purpose. John Walsh devoted his life to helping victims and supporting law enforcement, while Reve quietly continued honoring Adam's memory through advocacy and public awareness. Together, they demonstrated that even in unimaginable heartbreak, compassion and determination can create hope for others. The Walsh family also grew in the years that followed. John and Reve welcomed more children into their lives, building a family while never forgetting the son whose memory remained at the center of everything they did. They have often spoken about remembering Adam, not only for the tragedy that changed America, but for the joyful little boy he was before the world knew his name. That distinction mattered deeply to them. Adam was not born to become a symbol. He was a child who loved cartoons, toys, and spending time with his parents. He laughed. He played. He dreamed like every other 6-year-old. Those who loved him wanted the world to remember those moments, not only the terrible event that ended them. The emotional impact extended far beyond the Walsh family. Communities across Florida mourned alongside them. People who had never met Adam attended memorial services, sent letters of support, and contributed to search efforts and child safety initiatives. For many parents, Adam became the child they never knew but could never forget. His photograph remained recognizable for decades because families across America saw their own children reflected in his smile. The case also left a lasting impression on the investigators who worked it. Many detectives later acknowledged that Adam's disappearance stayed with them throughout their careers. Some retired before the case was officially closed. Others inherited the investigation years later. Regardless of when they joined, they shared a common goal: to give one family the answers they had waited so long to receive. Although the official closure in 2008 brought a measure of certainty, it could never erase nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions. For many people involved in the case, Closure did not mean forgetting. It meant finally understanding what had happened and ensuring that Adam's story would continue to inspire positive change. Communities also found ways to heal. Schools strengthened child safety education. Neighborhood organizations promoted awareness programs. Law enforcement agencies improved cooperation in missing child investigations. Parents became more engaged in conversations about protecting children in public places. These changes did not happen overnight. They were built gradually, inspired by one family's determination that no other parent should experience the same nightmare. Today, Adam Walsh's name is recognized across the United States. But his greatest legacy is not found in newspaper headlines or legal documents. It lives in the children who returned home safely because someone recognized a suspect. It lives in the families who received help through victims' advocacy organizations. It lives in every law enforcement officer who responds immediately when a child is reported missing. And it lives in every parent who holds a child's hand a little tighter while walking through a crowded place. Perhaps that is the most powerful legacy of all. A little boy whose life lasted only 6 years continues to protect children more than 4 decades later. His story reminds us that behind every investigation is a family whose lives have been forever changed. Behind every missing child poster is a mother refusing to stop searching, a father refusing to stop believing, and a child whose name deserves to be remembered with dignity, compassion, and love. As Adam's story approaches its final chapter, one message rises above every legal victory and every investigative milestone. The greatest tribute to his life is not simply remembering how he died. It is remembering how one little boy inspired millions of people to value every child's right to come home safely. When Adam Walsh disappeared in the summer of 1981, he was just 6 years old. He wasn't a public figure. He wasn't part of a famous family. He was simply a little boy who went shopping with his mother and never came home. Yet over the decades that followed, Adam's name became associated with one of the most significant child protection movements in American history. His story did far more than inspire sympathy. It inspired change. At the heart of that change stood John and Reve Walsh. After losing their son, they could have chosen to live quietly, far from television cameras and public attention. Instead, they made a decision that would affect millions of families they would never meet. They dedicated their lives to protecting children. Their advocacy helped keep missing child cases in the national conversation long after Adam's own investigation faded from the front pages. As public awareness grew, lawmakers, law enforcement agencies, and victims' organizations began working together to strengthen the country's response to child abductions and crimes against children. One of the most important developments was the expansion of the missing children movement. Throughout the 1980s and beyond, organizations dedicated to locating missing children, supporting families, and educating communities gained greater visibility and public support. Rather than treating each disappearance as an isolated local case, there was increasing recognition that missing child investigations required cooperation across cities, counties, and state lines. That shift changed the way many investigations were handled. Police agencies strengthened communication. Information moved more quickly. Public participation became an essential part of finding missing children. One organization that became especially influential was the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, established in 1984 with support from Congress and many child safety advocates. Although the center was created through the efforts of numerous individuals and organizations, John Walsh became one of its most recognized public supporters over the years. The center developed into a national resource for families, investigators, educators, and child protection professionals. It assists law enforcement with missing child cases, provides resources for families, distributes missing child information, and promotes child safety education throughout the United States. Its work has touched countless lives. For many parents facing unimaginable circumstances, it became a place where they could find guidance, support, and experienced professionals dedicated to helping locate missing children. Adam's story also influenced broader legislative reforms. Over the years, federal and state governments introduced laws designed to strengthen child protection, improve information sharing, and enhance coordination between law enforcement agencies. Among the most well-known was the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006, would establish stronger national standards related to sex offender registration and expanded tools available to law enforcement. While no legislation can prevent every tragedy, these reforms reflected lessons learned from past investigations and demonstrated a national commitment to improving child safety. The impact extended beyond legislation. Schools expanded child safety education. Communities organized awareness campaigns. Parents became more informed about discussing personal safety with their children. Law enforcement agencies developed specialized training for missing child investigations. Technology also transformed the search for missing children. Photographs can now be shared across the country within minutes. Digital databases allow investigators to coordinate far more effectively than they could in 1981. Emergency notification systems and nationwide partnerships help spread critical information rapidly when a child disappears. Many of these improvements grew from years of advocacy by families, investigators, policymakers, and organizations determined to learn from cases like Adam's. Perhaps the greatest change, however, was cultural. Before Adam's disappearance, many Americans viewed child abductions as rare events that happened somewhere else. After 1981, families across the country became more aware of the importance of vigilance, communication, and community involvement. Parents became more proactive. Communities became more engaged. Law enforcement became more coordinated. And the public increasingly understood that protecting children is a shared responsibility. John Walsh often reminded audiences that behind every statistic is a real child and a real family waiting for answers. That message resonated because it came from experience, not theory. He wasn't speaking as an expert who had studied tragedy. He was a father who had lived through it. Today, more than 4 decades after Adam Walsh's disappearance, his influence continues to be felt. Every time investigators work together across jurisdictions, every time a missing child's photograph is rapidly shared nationwide, every time a family receives support from organizations dedicated to protecting children, Adam's legacy lives on. His life lasted only 6 years, yet the impact of his story has reached generations. Millions of parents have changed the way they protect their children because of the lessons learned from his case. Countless investigations have benefited from reforms inspired by the movement his family helped build. History remembers Adam Walsh because of a heartbreaking tragedy, but his true legacy is something far greater. It is measured not only in laws passed or organizations created, but in the children who have been found, the families who have received help, and the lives that may have been saved because one little boy's story encouraged a nation to do better. And in the final chapter of this documentary, we remember Adam not as a symbol or a headline, but as a smiling 6-year-old whose short life left a legacy that continues to protect children around the world. More than 4 decades have passed since July 27, 1981. The shopping mall where Adam Walsh disappeared has changed. The headlines have faded. The investigators who worked the original case have retired. A new generation has grown up knowing Adam's story only through documentaries, books, and history. Yet one thing has never changed. The love his family still carries for him. To millions of people, Adam Walsh became the face of child safety in America. His name appears in legislation. His story is taught in law enforcement training. His case is studied by investigators learning how to respond to missing child emergencies. But to John and Reve Walsh, Adam was never simply a symbol. He was their little boy, a 6-year-old who loved cartoons, video games, and spending time with his parents, a child with a bright smile and an even brighter future. When John Walsh speaks about his son, he rarely begins with the investigation. He begins with the memories, the laughter, the curiosity, the ordinary family moments that every parent treasures but often takes for granted. Those are the moments the Walsh family wants the world to remember, not only the tragedy, but the child whose life inspired so much change. Over the years, Adam's legacy has continued to grow in ways that few could have imagined in 1981. His story encouraged stronger child protection laws. It inspired greater cooperation between law enforcement agencies. It helped strengthen national efforts to locate missing children. Organizations dedicated to protecting children have supported countless families because the nation chose to learn from what happened to Adam. Parents today are more aware of child safety than previous generations. Schools regularly teach children how to respond if they become separated from a parent or approached by a stranger. Communities work more closely with law enforcement during missing child investigations. Technology now allows emergency information to spread across the country within minutes. While many people, organizations, investigators, and lawmakers contributed to these improvements, Adam's case became one of the defining moments that encouraged America to rethink how it protects its children. For John Walsh, however, the greatest measure of success has never been awards, television programs, or public recognition. It has always been the children who made it home safely. Every missing child found, every dangerous fugitive captured, every family spared the heartbreak his own family experienced. Those victories became Adam's living legacy. The official closure of the investigation in 2008 brought a measure of legal resolution. The Hollywood Police Department concluded that Ottis Toole was responsible for Adam's abduction and murder. Although the passage of time meant many questions could never be answered with complete certainty in a courtroom, the Walsh family finally received the acknowledgement they had sought for nearly 3 decades. Justice, however, has many meanings. For the legal system, it means identifying the person responsible. For investigators, it means refusing to abandon the search for truth. For families, it often means knowing that their loved one will never be forgotten. And in Adam Walsh's case, perhaps justice is also found in the lives that have been protected because of his story. His legacy cannot be measured only by laws passed or investigations improved. It can also be measured by awareness, by conversations between parents and children, by teachers reminding students how to stay safe, by police officers responding immediately when a child is reported missing, by ordinary citizens who choose to pay attention because they understand that one small observation could save a life. Adam Walsh never had the chance to grow up. He never celebrated another birthday after the age of 6. He never graduated from school, never started a career, never built a family of his own. Those dreams ended far too soon. But the compassion his story inspired has reached millions of people across generations. Few lives have changed so many others in such a profound way. As we close this documentary, it is important to remember that behind every famous case is a real family whose loss never truly ends. Behind every investigation is a child who deserved the opportunity to grow up. And behind every reform inspired by tragedy is the hope that another family may never have to experience the same pain. Adam Walsh's story is not remembered because of the darkness that took his life. It is remembered because of the light his memory continues to bring to the protection of children around the world. His life reminds us that vigilance matters, compassion matters, justice matters, and above all, every child deserves a chance to return home safely. Final closing line. Adam Walsh left home expecting nothing more than an ordinary afternoon with his mother. He never returned. But while his life was tragically cut short, his legacy continues to protect millions of children, inspire families, strengthen investigations, and remind the world that every missing child is more than a case. They are someone's entire world. May Adam Walsh never be remembered only for how he was lost, but for how his life changed America forever.